Hello and welcome to In Depth. I'm Tina Jha. Chinese President Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Narendra Modi are set to hold their second informal summit in October this year. The details of the summit aimed at raising China-India ties to a higher level are yet to be finalized. But what we know so far is that in the weeks preceding the informal meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi, special representatives of both countries will hold the next round of border talks. It will be the first meeting between the two special representatives, National Security Advisor Ajit Doval and Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, since the reorganization of Jammu and Kashmir and the abrogation of Article 370. The decision was taken during External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar's three-day visit to China. During talks with his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi, the External Affairs Minister made it clear that revoking Jammu and Kashmir's special status and bifurcating the state into two union territories was an internal matter, and the changes did not impact existing borders either with China or with Pakistan. China has also indicated that it is looking at early harvest in border negotiations with India. Today's In Depth takes a look at the various aspects of border dispute between India and China, the contentious issues, and what has been the outcome of the several rounds of talks in so many years. External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar has in fact concluded his three-day visit to China. And during his visit, while underlining the importance of bilateral relations, the minister said both countries should respect each other's core concerns while managing their differences. Both countries also signed 4 agreements and decided to hold the next round of border talks before October. Jaishankar's visit holds importance as it comes just after the government's decision to revoke Article 370 in Jammu and Kashmir.
India and China will hold the next round of boundary talks, the first since the abrogation of Article 370 in Jammu and Kashmir, soon. Talks between two special representatives, National Security Advisor Ajit Doval and Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, will take place before the informal summit between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Chinese President Xi Jinping. The informal summit, the second of its kind, will be held in India this October. A decision regarding the boundary talks was taken during Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar's just concluded three-day visit to China. While Jaishankar's visit was scheduled before the government announced its decision on Jammu and Kashmir, it came right after the crucial decision to bifurcate Jammu and Kashmir and set up a separate union territory of Ladakh. Last week, India had reacted strongly to a Chinese statement on its decision to revoke Article 370, reminding the Red Dragon that the decision was India's internal matter. China had opposed the move to make Ladakh a separate union territory.
On the issue of the change of reorganization of Jammu and Kashmir and creation of a separate union territory of Ladakh, they said that this is unacceptable. But when Dr. Jaishankar was there, the External Affairs Minister, he told them very, very clearly, number one, that it's an internal matter of India, and India has full sovereign right and authority both to change Article 370 as also to have, whatever reorganization it wishes to do for better governance, for better social economic development.
In his meeting with Wang Yi, Jaishankar reiterated India's stand and said the decision has no implication for either the external boundaries of India or the line of actual control with China. Jaishankar also told Wang that it was important to ensure that bilateral differences should not become disputes, as future of the ties will depend on the mutual sensitivity to each other's core concerns
that the two sides can give. So I think both sides really need to ensure that this issue gets resolved quickly, and I think the negotiators will get direction and guidance from the political leaders that they should try to sort out the boundary question in a fair and balanced manner.
So far, 21 rounds of talks have been held between India and China to resolve differences over the line of actual control, which spans a distance of 3,488 kilometers, mostly over hilly terrain.
Right now, it is Mr. Ajit Doval who is the special representative. They keep meeting, he meets his counterpart, who is now a very senior functionary of the Chinese establishment. They have already met about 21, 22 times, and they are trying to sort out the border question, resolve the border question, which is so that it is mutually acceptable to both sides and it can be done through dialogue. It should be a fair and a balanced decision that should be taken by the two sides.
The last round, held in Sichuan in November last year, happened against the backdrop of the 73-day standoff between the two militaries at Doklam, where it was agreed that an early settlement of the boundary question serves the fundamental interests of both countries. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
After a long lull of over 30 years, the border tensions between China and India peaked in recent years. And the most notable incident was the one in Doklam. In our next report, let's take a look at what the incident was all about.
In June 2017, a territorial dispute with China came alive as a full-blown standoff at the Doklam Plateau. This continued for the next 2 months amid reports that suggested China was increasing its military presence in the area. Doklam, or Donglang in Chinese, is spread over nearly 100 square kilometers. It comprises a plateau and a valley at the tri-junction between India, Bhutan and China. It is surrounded by the Chumbi Valley of Tibet, Bhutan's Ha Valley and Sikkim. Doklam is located close to the Siliguri corridor that connects India with its northeastern region. It is also called Chicken's Neck and is a vulnerable point for India. China is at a military disadvantage since both Indian and Bhutanese troops are on a higher ground around the valley. Bringing the area under its control gives China the strategic advantage of not only getting a commanding view but also easy access to Chumbi Valley and the Siliguri corridor. Trouble started on June 16, 2017 when China tried to build a road in the area. Bhutan objected to Chinese troops bringing equipment to extend a road towards the Bhutanese army camp near the Jamperi Ridge in Doklam. Bhutan also told China that a road inside its territory directly violates bilateral boundary agreements. As an ally of Bhutan, India was drawn into the standoff after Bhutan requested its help. Indian troops entered Doklam and stopped the construction. Thereafter, media reports citing satellite images and intelligence inputs suggested that China had erected several permanent military posts, a few helipads and new trenches. On June 30th, the Ministry of External Affairs said such construction would represent a significant change of status quo with serious security implications for India. The Chinese government released a map to accuse India of trespassing into its territory, claiming India was impeding boundary talks between China and Bhutan. The claim, however, doesn't stand since Bhutan has agreed to let India guide its foreign policy and defense affairs, making it a protected state of India. In 2007, it signed a new friendship treaty that made it mandatory for Bhutan to take India's guidance on foreign policy. On 28 August 2017, India and China announced that they had agreed to pull their troops back from the face-off in Doklam. China has in the past been guilty of incursions in Ladakh at the Depsang Valley in 2013, the Chumar area in 2014 and the Pangong Tso in 2017. It has claimed that this has been due to the absence of a clear demarcation of the line of actual control. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
China and India have a long history of territorial disputes along their shared border, with the 1962 conflict being the major one. In our next report, let's try and understand the various aspects of this border dispute that has been existing for several decades between India and China.
China and India have a long history of territorial disputes. The shared border has seen 3 major conflicts. the Sino-Indian War of 1962, the Chola incident in 1967, and the 1987 Sino-India skirmish. The biggest of these conflicts was the war in 1962. Perceiving a threat to its rule in Tibet, on July 10, 1962, 350 Chinese troops surrounded an Indian post in Chushul in Jammu and Kashmir. On October 20, 1962, China's People's Liberation Army invaded India in Ladakh and across the McMahon Line in the then Northeast Frontier Agency. Till the war actually started, the Indian side was confident that there would be a no war. Chinese troops attacked the underprepared Indian side and entered Aksai Chin, which thereafter became a disputed border area between India and China.
The history of it goes back actually quite long into the past, and it starts essentially with the status of Jammu and Kashmir and with how Jammu and Kashmir became part of the Indian Republic in 1947. But more recently, in the 1950s, with China essentially annexing Tibet, there was concern that China's control over Aksai Chin will become considerably stronger. At the same time, the Chinese have also linked the issue of India's claim on Aksai Chin to India's claim on the Arunachal Pradesh, or what was in the past, before the 80s, called the Northeastern Frontier Agency. The history of the dispute since has revolved around settling both the status of Arunachal Pradesh, especially of Tawang, as well as that of Aksai Chin. But border talks so far have proved to be inconclusive.
Relations between India and China deteriorated for the rest of the 1960s and the early 1970s. In late 1967, there were two more conflicts between Indian and Chinese forces at the border in Sikkim. The first one was the Nathula incident and the other was Chola incident. On September 11, 1967, Chinese and Indian forces clashed at Nathula when Chinese troops opened fire on a detachment of the Indian soldiers tasked with protecting an engineering company that was fencing the north shoulder of Nathula. Over the next 5 days, there was an exchange of heavy artillery and mortar fire between the Indian and Chinese forces. 62 Indian soldiers were martyred. Indian and Chinese forces clashed again in Chola incident. On 1st October 1967, Indian and Chinese soldiers had an argument over the control of a boulder at the Chola outpost in Sikkim. On 10th October, both sides again exchanged heavy fire. Casualties were reported from both the sides.
You see, there are a number of areas in which we have a border dispute. One is, the most important one is in the east. And there you have Arunachal Pradesh, the state of Arunachal Pradesh. It is 93,000 square kilometers, and China claims it as its own. So the whole of Arunachal Pradesh, the state of Arunachal Pradesh, is claimed by China as South Tibet, because it says that it is an extension of the Tibetan plateau. And it says that we, of course, demarcate our border between India and China by the McMahon Line. And China says that it does not accept and acknowledge that McMahon Line because that was under duress and under pressure of the British, that the Chinese were forced to accept it and to sign on the document.
In 1984, squads of Indian soldiers began actively patrolling the Sum-Dorong Chu Valley in Arunachal Pradesh. In the winter of 1986, China deployed their troops to the Sum-Dorong Chu before the Indian team could arrive and build a helipad at Wangdong. Surprised by the Chinese occupation, India's then Chief of Army Staff, General K. Sundarji, airlifted a brigade to the region. Chinese troops could not move any further into the valley and were forced away from the valley. By 1987, then Foreign Minister N.D. Tiwari and Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi travelled to Beijing to negotiate a mutual de-escalation.
The second part of the border is in the west, which is the Aksai Chin area, which is about 38,000 square kilometers, and that was seized from India during the 1962 war. So these are two huge territories which belong to India but which are claimed by China. Then also there is another piece of land which is known as the Shaksgam Valley, which is a part of the what is Pakistan occupied Kashmir, and that was handed over by Pakistan to China in 1963 because there were some important infrastructure projects that were running through that area. So if you put all of this together, 93,000 plus 38,000 plus about 5,700 square kilometers, all this area. And then in between, there are a number of places because, you know, the total area between, the total boundary between India and China is to the tune of about 4,000 kilometers. And there are a number of areas where the boundary is not exactly demarcated.
China and India have held 20 rounds of talks to resolve the boundary disputes starting in 1960s. And different mechanisms have been set up to maintain peace along the 4,000-kilometer line. The Doklam standoff in 2017 became the worst crisis between the two sides since the 1962 war, lasting as long as 2 months. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
India has been seeking a fair, reasonable and mutually acceptable settlement of the boundary question on the basis of the 2005 political parameters and guiding principles. And with the Jammu and Kashmir reorganisation legislation, India has assured Beijing that the borders would remain unaffected until the two sides mutually resolve the border issues.
The India-China border dispute relates to the 3,488-kilometer-long line of actual control. For several decades, both countries have been engaged in talks to resolve this border dispute. As many as 21 rounds of talks have been held since 2002, when both sides appointed special representatives to sort out the border dispute. Even prior to 2002, several rounds of talks were held without any concrete results. The last round of border talks were held between National Security Advisor Ajit Doval and Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi in November 2018 at Chengdu in China's southwestern Sichuan province. In the 21st round of talks, the special representatives of the two sides undertook a comprehensive review of the earlier rounds of talks. The special representatives resolved to intensify their efforts to achieve a fair, reasonable and mutually acceptable solution. Both sides underlined the importance of approaching the boundary question from the strategic perspective of India-China relations and agreed that an early settlement of the dispute serves the fundamental interests of both countries. They agreed to authorize the bilateral working mechanism on consultation and coordination for border affairs to hold consultations to work agreements. It was also agreed that pending the final resolution of the boundary question, it is important to maintain peace and tranquility in the border areas. With a view to maintain strategic communication at all levels, special representatives held discussions on various confidence-building measures to promote exchanges and communication between the border personnel.
First of all, India and China really does not share a border in the legal sense, where a border is defined to be both something that there is a line on the map as well as on the ground there are posts. What India and China shares is a line of actual control, which is the relative placing of both militaries. This is a very complex problem with a long history that goes back to the early days of India's independence and China's annexation of Tibet, and about India's claim both on Arunachal Pradesh as well as India's claim on Aksai Chin. The latest round of border talks that have been announced today is going to take a fresh look at the problem, and these talks have been now going on for some time. It is expected that with betterment of India-China relations in other spheres, this will translate to an early solution of the border or of the boundary dispute.
In June 2019, following a meeting between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Xi Jinping on the sidelines of the SCO summit in Bishkek, special representatives of both countries were asked to speed up discussions for a border settlement that is acceptable to both sides. Both leaders stressed on a quick, constructive and driven by larger context solution to the decades-old boundary dispute.
Very recently, when the two leaders met, Prime Minister Modi met Xi Jinping in Bishkek on the sidelines of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization summit. There it was mentioned that both sides are going to work proactively to sort out the border, to resolve the border. And what I can foresee, both hope and wish, and also there are some indications on the ground that there will be discussions between the two sides. These discussions will be further activated, will be further energized, and we would be able at least to get resolution of the border, demarcation of the border, at least in some areas, which will help in fostering confidence and building trust between the two countries.
A month later, both sides reviewed the progress made in the implementation of various confidence-building measures to maintain peace and tranquility along their common borders. The review was done at the 14th meeting of the Working Mechanism for Consultation and Coordination on India-China Border Affairs in Beijing. The two sides also reviewed regular exchanges at the troops level and also at the diplomatic level. The Working Mechanism for Consultation and Coordination was established in the year 2012 as an institutional mechanism for consultation and coordination for management of India-China border areas, as well as to exchange views on strengthening communication and cooperation, including between the border security personnel of the two sides. Headed by senior officials, the WMCC mechanism has become a major platform between the two countries to exchange views on strengthening communication and cooperation, including between the border security personnel. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV. The tumultuous relationship between India and China has been marked by border disputes, in fact, even a major war in 1962. But the fact remains that India was the first non-communist country to recognize the People's Republic of China after its proclamation in 1949. Also, China has time and again claimed parts of India's territory as its own, resulting in heightened tensions between the two countries. Here's a look at how the relationship evolved between the two Asian giants down the years.
India and China won their independence almost at the same time. While India became independent on 15 August 1947, the People's Liberation Army defeated the Nationalist Party on October 1, 1949. On 30th October, India became the first non-communist nation to recognize People's Republic of China and in 1950 appointed K.M. Panikkar as the first Indian ambassador to China. In 1954, China and India signed the Panchsheel document, taking India-China relations to a new level. However, China's stand on Tibet came as a disappointment to Nehru and his vision of peaceful coexistence. On 3rd April 1959, India granted asylum to Dalai Lama, who had escaped from Lhasa after China's annexation of Tibet. This was the start of relations taking a bad turn between India and China. India-China conflict over border issues started in the 1950s, with China beginning to occupy parts of Indian territory on China-India border. China launched a massive attack on India on 20th October 1962. The border clash resulted in India's defeat as the Chinese army pushed Indian forces to within 48 kilometers of Assam. The war ended with China declaring a unilateral ceasefire on 21st November and withdrew 20 kilometers behind its contended line of control. Relations between China and India deteriorated during the rest of 1960s and the early 1970s, till India and China decided in 1976 to restore diplomatic relations after a 15-year diplomatic halt. Relations started to thaw in December 1988 with the visit of then Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi to China. Several agreements on economy, trade, science and technology were signed during this visit. India-China relations hit a low point once again in 1998 following India's nuclear tests, with China turning into the biggest critique of India's entry into the nuclear club. However, the year 2004 became a milestone on India-China relations. In 2004, both countries proposed opening the Nathula and the Jelepla passes in Sikkim. In the same year, bilateral trade surpassed the $10 billion mark for the first time ever. In April 2005, Chinese Premier Wen Jiabo visited Bangalore to push for increased India-China cooperation in high-tech industries. In 2006, China and India reopened the Nathula Pass for trading after 44 years. In 2010, Wen Jiabo, accompanied by 400 Chinese business leaders, visited India to boost trade between the two countries. In April 2011, during the BRICS summit in China, the two countries agreed to restore defense cooperation. After the summit, China also stopped the practice of administering stapled visas to residents of Jammu and Kashmir.
So that's it from us today in depth. We'll be back same time tomorrow with a focus on some other subject. And in case you missed the television broadcast, you can also watch our program online on YouTube, the link for which is given below on your screens. Suggestions and feedback about the program are also welcome. Thank you very much for your time.
Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman in her